Hello and welcome to Your Broken Galaxy. Today, I am releasing my 100th video on this channel. It's gonna be a long one, so pause it, grab a drink, grab a snack. I'm actually gonna have pictures on this one, unlike a lot of them, so you can maybe enjoy some sight gags as well. It is What If Anakin Was a Girl? Let's go. So, instead of being born as a boy, Anakin is born as the little girl, Annie. She has a life of slavery, unfortunately, though she has some rather incredible hobbies, which frankly would cost a lot of money. I don't know where that's coming from. But one day, Qui-Gon and his group show up in her shop, and Watto says, "Girl, get in here!" And when she comes, Watto says, "What took you so long?" And she says, "I was just putting on my makeup." And Watto's like, "Watch the store." And then he takes Qui-Gon out back to talk. So little Annie sees Padme and is like, "Are you an angel?" And Padme is like, "No, hon, I'm a gosh darn queen." And Annie is like, "Really?" So Padme says, "You're a funny little girl." And she's like, "I'm a pilot, you know, and someday I'm gonna fly away. But I can't yet, because, you know, I'm owned by that ugly bug over there." And Padme is like, "You're a slave?" And Annie says, "I'm a person, and one day I'm going to grow up to be an independent woman, and my name is Annie." So Padme says, "I'm sorry, but you go, girl. Get that freedom." Qui-Gon comes back in and says, "We're leaving." And Padme says, "I'm glad to have met you, Annie." Jar Jar ends up getting in a fight with Sebulba a few minutes later on the street, and Annie's like, "No, don't hurt him." And Sebulba stops, not because he doesn't want to hurt Jar Jar, but because he wants to insult Annie, and he does. So Annie just starts walking behind the group for no apparent reason. They go to the old lady Jira's shop, and she says, "A storm's a-coming, Annie." So Annie is like, "You know what I'm thinking? Slumber party!" While they are there, Annie shows Padme C-3PO, and she's like, "That's neat." And then Annie is like, "I'm also building a pod racer." And Padme says, "Oh my goodness, how did a slave manage to get the skills to build a fully functional protocol droid and a pod racer, let alone the resources to construct such things?" And Annie says, "I'm a person, and my name is Annie." And Padme says, "I'm sorry, I know I did it again. But still, you're just 9. And Annie says, "Yeah, but I'm the protagonist." So over dinner, Shmi is like, "We have trackers." And Annie says, "Yeah, they'll blow us up if we try and escape." And Padme is just horrified at the idea that her new little friend just has a bomb in her body. She starts talking about the Republic, and Shmi is like, "This is a hut world." And Annie, who is bored of the politics after just 2 sentences, starts bragging about how she can pod race. And Qui-Gon is like, "You must have Jedi reflexes." And Annie says, "You're a Jedi, aren't you?" And Qui-Gon is like, "Maybe." And Annie's like, "The Jedi are cool, but I wouldn't want to join them because they always wear brown." And Padme snickers at that. And then Annie says, "I have a dream that I'm a Jedi, and I have a beautiful red dress, and I came here and freed all the slaves. Are you going to free us?" And Qui-Gon's like, "I'm afraid not." Then she says, "Well, can you give me a red dress?" And Qui-Gon's like, "I don't think so." And Padme is like just about to cry over the horrible plight of her young friend. So Padme says, "We're just stranded for a bit and we'll be on our way, but we're totally broke." And then they decide to gamble because that's the solution to all their problems. So they start their slumber party after dinner. There's Diet Pepsi, and they order pizza, have ice cream, they watch 16 Candles, and Annie shows Padme how amazing Tatooinean sand is for exfoliating. It's the best. So they decide to trust their fate to a girl they hardly know, and Padme is like, "Girl power, I approve." So the next day, Annie is bragging to all her friends about how she's in the race, and they're all laughing at her. That evening, Qui-Gon gives Annie a metachlorian test, but when she pricks her arm, and she starts like crying, and she runs away to Padme, and she says, "Qui-Gon hurt her." And he's like, no, okay, I took a metachlorian count. I was testing to see if she can use the Force. And they're like, "Well, can she?" And he calls Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's like, "It's over 9,000. But more specifically, it's a little over 20,000. And Qui-Gon is like, "That's the highest number ever." And he says, "Annie, do you forgive me?" And she says, I guess so. So the next day is the day of the race, and her little friend Kickster is like, you'll probably do it this time. And Padme's like, do what? And Kickster's like, we'll finish the race, of course. She's never finished. And Padme says, you've never finished a race? And Annie is like, yeah, but I will today. And Padme says, that's right, Queen. You believe to achieve. So the race is basically the exact same. Sebulba murders some folks. Annie wins. Everybody is happy except Watto, who gives them the parts. Qui-Gon goes back and says, you're free. And they're like, what? We get to leave? And they say, oh, no, I'm sorry, just Annie. And Shmi is like, you're crazy if you think I'm going to let my little girl go with you. How do I know that you won't do something terrible with her? And Qui-Gon says, well, I'm a Jedi Knight. And Shmi is like, why the heck would that change anything? So she says, I'm not letting her go with some middle-aged gambler. And Qui-Gon says, okay, well, just give me a few hours. Hold on here for a second. So he goes back to the ship. But unlike in the movies, Anakin's not with him, so he doesn't walk quite as slow. He's able to get there a little bit faster. He gets there and he says, everybody, I want Annie's freedom. Yeah, it was kind of a jerk move not to mention it before now, but her mom won't let her come with me since I'm, a middle-aged man. That seems completely reasonable to me, Captain Panaka says. So Qui-Gon says, I was thinking, since I basically made Watto completely destitute by screwing him over with all of these bets, that we could try and buy Shmi's freedom to help him out a bit and also get her to come. The Queen gives permission to sell the royal wardrobe, and Qui-Gon goes outside to see Darth Maul coming. Him and Obi-Wan are like, oh, here we go. So they have an epic fight on the sands of Tatooine. Maul is terrifying and brilliant as he flips about the place, but unable to separate the Jedi as he has found himself outclassed. After a few moments, when he is staring them down, he suddenly gets shot in the back by Captain Panaka. They are like, oh, cool, thanks, dude. They drag his corpse onto the ship so the Jedi can inspect it. Then Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan go with a couple of crew members and sell the royal wardrobe, a couple other trinkets. Shmi takes all of the money that she got from selling Annie's pod racer. They sell almost everything they own, and Shmi gets her freedom and goes with them. They fly back to Coruscant and appear before the Jedi Council and are like, this little girl is like way too attached to her mother. I mean, seriously, she's just sitting there in the back of the room by the door. But Qui-Gon is like, I'll train the girl. And Shmi is like, not without a chaperone you won't, you creepy old man. So Qui-Gon says, fine. And the council is like, well, this is outrageously unorthodox. But they end up assigning Shakti to help train Annie. They also present the body of Darth Maul, and everybody's like, oh yeah, that looks like a Sith, because they do a little blood test on him, and that's all it takes to tell that he can use the Force, apparently. Thanks for that one, George. So, Shmi, however, can't stay in the Jedi Temple. So, Obi-Wan, Shakti, Qui-Gon Jinn, Annie, Padme, and Shmi all go to Naboo. The Queen says they'll give Shmi citizenship and set her up in a nice little apartment and try to find her a job. They get there and free all the pilots, but Darth Maul is already dead. So the Jedi just fly through the palace, killing everybody, everything, destroying all the droids, and by the time they get to Nute Gunray, barely any Gungans have died at all. The pilots didn't even make it to the space battle. Nute commands the ship to shut down. So they have a big old celebration, and Palpatine looks at Annie and says, I'll watch your career with great interest. And he's like actually making air quotes with his fingers when he says career, and Annie just feels super awkward about it. Bum, 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 ba, 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 ba. 10 years have passed, and Qui-Gon and Shakti and Annie are sent to check on Padme after an assassination attempt. When Padme sees Qui-Gon, she's like, Master Qui-Gon, it's so good to see you. And she goes and gives him a big ol' hug. Then she looks at Annie, and they grab each other's hand and start jumping and screaming like giddy little schoolgirls. So Annie says, it's so good to see you. I know, it's been so long, Padme replies. You've grown so much. So, could you tell me how my mom is? Annie asks. Oh, she's great. She has a job as a secretary and actually just got married a couple years ago to C.O. Bibble. I have no idea who that is, Annie says in excitement. I'm just glad she isn't in mortal danger and under the yoke of slavery. And Padme smiles and nods. So they end up talking about the specifics of guarding Padme, and it's decided that Qui-Gon and the security team will stay in the foyer, and Annie looks at Padme and says, I think you and Shakti and I should stay in the bedroom. You know what that means, Padme asks. A slumber party! They both scream. Shaak Ti is utterly baffled by this behavior and turn of events, but they end up ordering Palpatino's pizza, have some Diet Pepsi, ice cream, they get Sabe to make brownies, have facials. It's the best. That night, in the middle of a game of Truth or Dare, Annie and Shaak Ti suddenly turn towards the window. They rush Padme out of the room to the security team, and instead of jumping out the window like psychopaths, they use the Force to forcibly pull the droid into the room that's trying to assassinate them. They get R2 to quickly figure out where the droid is from, and they get 3 speeders to chase down Zam Wesell. 1 speeder for Qui-Gon, 1 speeder for Shaak Ti, 1 speeder for Annie. Because they have 3 different speeders, they're able to trap her, corner her much more easily. While Qui-Gon and Annie are looking at her and questioning her, Shaak Ti is standing watch. In the Force, she can sense the danger and understands a poisonous dart is coming, and she's able to stop it. And Zam says, "Dang, my partner just tried to kill me." While Annie and Shaak Ti start to run after the figure that just tried to kill Zam, Zam tells Qui-Gon that the name of her partner is Jango Fett and he lives on Kamino. So Qui-Gon goes to Kamino, and the cloners are like, "Oh, good, Jedi. We have an entire army equipped and fully trained for the public." And Qui-Gon's like, "That is not okay." And the cloners are like, what's wrong with them? And Qui-Gon's like, "Just hold on a minute. I'm going to go talk to the Jedi Council. By the way, is Jango Fett in?" So he ends up getting brought to see Jango because he is in. However, Jango's not wearing armor, just like in the movie. And Qui-Gon is able to easily capture him and then returns to Coruscant, forgetting to contact the Jedi about the clones. Meanwhile, Padme, Shaak Ti, and Annie have gone off to Naboo in order to protect Padme from the assassins and throw them off her tail. They go to the Lake Country and have an amazing time, sunbathing on the beach, day picnics by the waterfalls, slumber party after slumber party. It's the best. They even have Shmi and C.O. Bibble come to meet them one day at a secret location for lunch. Just precious. While they are talking late into the night, Annie says, "You know, I'm really kind of skeeved out by Sheev Palps." And Shaak Ti is like, "Why is that?" And Annie says, "Well, he's always trying to give me advice and stuff and looking at me in a really weird way." And Padme says, "Oh yeah, I totally get those vibes from him ever since I was a little kid. Has he ever tried to do anything?" And Annie's like, "What do you mean?" And she says, like, "You know, boyfriend, girlfriend things." And Annie says, No, he's just creepy." And Padme says, "Yeah, he never tried to do anything with me. Just creepy. So Jango tells the Jedi that they have to go to Geonosis. So Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are like, "Let's go, boy." And they get there, and Dooku's like, "Oh, Qui-Gon, I'm glad you're here. I need your advice. The Sith Lord is in charge of the Senate." And Qui-Gon's like, "That seems rather unbelievable. If it's true, you need to stop the charade." And Dooku is like, "Yes, that's what I'll do, because I now have my good friend and Padawan Qui-Gon Jinn to give me advice. I'm so grateful you're still here." So the droid army stands down, and Palpatine is like, "Come on, guys, what the crap?" So he is able to get some of his agents to take control of the clone army on Kamino, and instead of being an army for the Republic, it becomes an invading army. As Dooku is set to testify, a massive battle breaks out over Coruscant where the clones invade and are able to kill the unarmed Dooku, the unarmed Jango, and Qui-Gon, who is trying to defend them. He's overwhelmed and sadly loses his life to the onslaught of Jango lookalikes. Ba 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 ba. 3 years of the Clone Wars have passed, and the Jedi have been leading planetary militia against the clones, which are led by General Grievous. Annie has become a beacon of hope and a star soldier, but the clones have abducted Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Annie and his Padawan learner, Ahsoka, are sent to rescue the Chancellor. Once they arrive, they find Grievous holding him, and a saber fight commences. During the fight, Grievous stabs and kills Ahsoka, because he is a hardcore Jedi killer, not a freaking coward in this story. Annie defeats Grievous by disarming him, and Palpatine says, "Good, kill him." And Annie does. So Palpatine says, "Don't feel bad. He had it coming. He killed your apprentice." And Annie is like, "I don't feel bad. He was just a droid." And Palpatine says, No, he was actually a cyborg. And Annie says, really? Dang, I would have just arrested him had I known that. Well, I guess I shouldn't dwell on the past. So, they make their escape, and after an interview with the news crew, Padme comes up to Annie, and Annie says, I have wonderful news. I'm pregnant. And Padme is like, what? And she's like, yeah. So Padme says, Annie, this is good news. So Palpatine starts giving Annie dreams about his mom dying, and Annie is freaking out. The Clone Wars have been taking a bit of a break because the clones lost their general, and unfortunately Palp's attempt to bring Annie to the dark side by having her kill the unarmed Grievous has failed. So he sends the clone troopers to Naboo, and they just decimate the place. The most beautiful place Annie had ever seen, with all of its waterfall and lake goodness, is destroyed. So she is sent to help, and while they are there, a group of clones execute Shmi right in front of Annie. Annie goes ballistics and slaughters them all. She comes back to report on the matter. Palpatine is like, Annie, I saw the video recordings from Naboo. I know what happened. It's all right. And Annie's like, no, it was horrible. So then Palpatine has the clones capture Padme. Annie goes to save her, but just as she gets there and the clones see her come into the room, they shoot Padme. Annie goes on slaughtering all of them, and looking at Padme dying on the ground after the clones have been defeated, Padme says, tell me, Annie, who's the father? And Annie says, it's Obi-Wan. And Padme smiles and dies. So Annie gets back, and Palpatine calls her into his office and says, Annie, you know, I'm from Naboo. I saw the recording devices of Padme's death. I know about Obi-Wan and the child. And of course, he says it like frustrated and with a look of anger inside, but he also thinks he can use this. And Annie says, please don't tell the Order. And Palpatine says, oh, it isn't for me to say anything, but you'll begin to show soon. And Annie says, I know, but I don't want Obi-Wan to be kicked out of the Order because of this. So Palpatine's wheels are turning on how he can use this, and he says, Annie, the Jedi are rigid and cold in their rules. They do not allow for love. I think it may be best if you and Master Kenobi left the Order. For everything that you've done for me and my people, I'll gladly provide for both of you a house and a life on Naboo when this war is over. Annie is touched, thinking that creepy Sheevy has actually just been misunderstood all of this time. So Palpanificent starts giving Annie dreams about Obi-Wan and the babies dying. Annie is sent on a mission where she's jumped by a bunch of clones and gets shot in the upper thigh, just a few inches away from her stomach. She rages again at the clones because of the attempt to kill her and slaughters them all. When she gets back to Coruscant, she tells Palpatine about it, and he says, yes, it was right for you to do that. These clones are horrible menaces to the galaxy. Finally, Palpatine issues Order 66, secretly, of course, and what that means in this scenario is that all of the clones converge on the Jedi Temple. Hundreds of thousands of them fly to Coruscant. They mercilessly slaughter the Jedi, including Obi-Wan. When Annie finds out, she is furious, and Palpatine calls her to his office. He says that the clones are trying to drive Force users to extinction, and that once the Jedi are done, they'll come for him too. He shares that he is a Sith Lord, and only through his power can she save herself and the children. But thankfully, they have found Kamino. Qui-Gon, Dooku, and Jango never told anyone else about the planet. Sidious says, you must kill every one of them. Barely any Jedi are left remaining. The Chancellor declares himself Emperor with Annie standing right by his side in a hood. Mace, Shaak Ti, and Kit Fisto are the only 3 Jedi left on Coruscant. Having finally deduced that Palps was behind the entire war as a way to gain power, they go to arrest him. Palpatine is able to kill Fisto instantly. Mace busts a window with his saber, and Palpatine quickly pushes Shaak Ti out of that window. As she is falling, she can feel in the Force that Mace dies, but she escapes. So Annie goes to Kamino in cloaked darkness, accompanied by hundreds of thousands of battle droids. She starts slaughtering her way through Topeka, killing clones and Kaminoans alike, and not just the men, the women, and the children too. Yoda and Shaak Ti find each other and are being hunted by the remaining clones, but because of the assassination attempt on the Emperor, they are outlaws of the Republic as well. After a few months, they learn that Annie is going to be visiting Ilum to oversee an imperial confiscation of the Kyber crystals. Shakti is told that she must go and kill Annie, and Yoda will go after Palpatine. On Ilum, Shakti faces down Annie. She tells them that the Jedi are evil for forbidding connection and that their attempt to kill Palpatine was wrong. Meanwhile, Yoda and Palps fight in the Senate building, pretty much just like the original story. And obviously pregnant Annie at this point faces off against Shakti, but due to the restraints of her pregnancy, though she is unable to move like usual, they end up jumping from iceberg to iceberg on a freezing river when Shakti jumps off and declares that she has the high ground. Annie jumps, but Shakti force pushes her into the river. Annie drops her saber, and as she falls in, Shakti grabs it. Annie crawls from the river, almost frozen. Shakti can feel her life and the life of the children fading. She performs a C-section and is able to save the children while Annie lay unconscious. Shakti leaves, assuming that there's no hope left for her. After Palps defeated Yoda, he could tell that Lady Vader was in trouble and went to Ilum to find her lying in the snow. Due to the horrible frostbite and the damage that was caused by the C-section to her internal organs, she has to suffer having her legs and arms removed and being constrained to a suit for the rest of her life. When she wakes up, she says, "My children, where are they?" And Palpatine says, "I'm afraid that in your defeat, they were killed by Shakti." And Annie screams, "No!" Well, there you have it, friends, my video for today and my 100th video on this channel. I do have a question. I'm a little bit curious. If Lady Vader is now constricted to her suit, who would be the best voice actress to play her? I don't know. I've been thinking about that. Anyway, stay tuned. At some point in time, it might be my 200th video, I am going to do episode 4, 5, and 6. And see how this whole thing comes to its conclusion. On this one, as you can tell, in the beginning, it was comedy, it was lots of jokes, but as I was writing it, I got just more and more into like how I'm trying to draw parallels with the original story, and I kind of left behind a good bit of the comedy. That was not my intention, that's just how it went. But then I was thinking in the car today, as I was thinking about this, you know, that's kind of how the prequel trilogy went. The first one had Jar Jar and a bunch of ridiculous jokes, but by the time you got to Revenge of the Sith, it was like dark and brooding and like, yeah. So, if you've not seen any of my videos before, this is a comedy channel. Please take a look around, see something that you might like. If the title sounds interesting, click on it, give it a listen. Other than that, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and all that garbage.